Hi, this is Jim with Twisted Hobbies. Today we're going to be building the Clik 25. Okay, today we're going to be building the Clik 25. Most importantly, I have downloaded and printed out my manual. It's going to walk me through step by step. I have the power combo, which consists of the propeller and motor, the ESC and the servos. Additionally from that, I'm excited to try out this carbon fiber prop from Pretty Model. And we have the receiver in trusty foam tack. I also have some CA that I'll be using as well in the build. But that's what we've got. Let's get going on the build.
Okay, the first thing that I like to do is open up my package, dump everything out and give it an inventory and make sure I've got everything, make sure I know where it's all going. Then I'm going to fold over all my surfaces, so my ailerons, my elevator, and my rudder. And we're going to leave these set for about an hour off to the side. I know it looks faster here, but trust me, it's been an hour. Then the most important part is to put down that parchment paper. By doing that, we're not going to end up gluing it to the table. Then I glue each wing when I figure out which side goes where. And the way that I glue it is I put the glue on, I press it together, I pull it back apart, and then when you press it together for a final time, then it makes a permanent final bond. Then we're going to start on the front wing spar. So I mark the center of it, I put foam tack down the edge of it, and then I'm using this roll of tape to help press it against the leading edge of the wing, and that looks great. Make sure to keep it nice and flat as it dries. Then we're going to dry fit the other wing spar. I trim it off on the edge because it was a little too long. Make sure it fits all the way in there. We fill the slot with foam tack, and then we press this down and make sure it's nice and flush with the EPP. Next, we'll put on the front portion of the horizontal fuselage, and then these little things are called turbulators. You'll see here, I did make one small mistake. There's a little divot in that piece, and the divot should be on the other side. I installed that upside down. It wasn't too big of a deal, but it helps line up the landing gear later on. So I get the turbulators installed, I get that installed, everything is looking great. Make sure it's dry and nice and flat. Then we'll put the spar into the elevator. And you'll see I'm doing a little bit of sanding on some of these carbon fiber pieces because I just want to make sure they have a nice tooth that's going to grip well when I glue it into place. Now we'll be gluing together the horizontal stabilizer and elevator. And when I do this, I'm going to measure from wingtip to tail tip to make sure that it is nice and even. And then we'll do a dry fit on these lateral stiffeners. Trim them to fit. And then load it with foam tack. And then I use the edge of the X-Acto to push it down flush with the EPP. Measure again. And then weight it down so that it dries flat. I verify one more time that everything is straight. That's looking great. And now we are ready to bind our receiver, center our servos, calibrate our ESC, and verify motor direction. There's a whole video for this in the description so that we can go into much more detail. Next, I'll remove all the little cutout tabs in order to put in our servo. That fits in there perfectly, and now we're ready for the bottom half of the vertical fuselage. I give it a good dry fit. We want to make sure that it doesn't bind anywhere like near the servo or anything like that. We apply foam tack, and then we press it into place. Now I check for square, and we also want to make sure that it is as tightly connected as possible. You don't want any gaps in there. Now we'll move on to the carbon fiber supports that go along the bottom of the plane. First, we need these little half moon pieces, and we're going to be able to glue them. There is a front and back. Make sure you orient them correctly. Then we will dry fit the wing struts. Their length was perfect, so I was able to just glue them into place. I did need to sand the ends just a little bit to fit into the little half moon pieces. Then we verify everything is square, and then give it a little more glue. Next up is cutting all of the bracing for the bottom of the plane, and the manual has a guide that shows you exactly how long to cut each one, and I just use my calipers to verify the length and get them clipped. I did make a little mistake here. I didn't see that I should have cut one more piece of carbon fiber. I did figure that out later. Now you'll see me scuffing up the ends of all of these. After I scuff them up, I also wipe them off with rubbing alcohol, and I do this just to make sure that there's some tooth for the glue to really stick to and they don't slide out as easily. Then I start the dry fit process on these, and then I also realized that I forgot to cut one of the pieces, so I go back and do a little more cutting. And then we're going to start gluing in each of the braces. As I'm gluing these in, I'm also verifying that it's square during this process. And then I brace it to make sure everything's flat, and I let it set for a while. Up next is going to be the aileron bracing. So there's a couple stiffeners in the aileron and then control horns. And I do need to trim the stiffeners. Dry fit those, everything's looking good there. And then glue it all in place. We glue in the supports for the aileron bracing, and then one more time I check for everything to be square, and then we're ready to install the braces. Now on these I cleaned them up a little bit, and I measure to the middle support piece. I saw through like halfway through the carbon fiber, and then I break it so it's still attached. And then I trim it off on the other end. And I do this so that way it gives a little more support in there and it's not all just coming together. It's one continuous piece. And that seems to work really well. You could always do them as separate pieces too and just glue it together in the middle. Okay, make sure those dry nice and flat. And then we're going to start working on the landing gear. First up is the elbows and axles. I get that put in. I'm having kind of a hard time getting them in there because the hole's a little small. So I grab my pin vise and open up the hole a little bit. And that didn't do anything, so I had to get a different bit and then open it up. And that's just the way it is building sometimes. Now those fit great, and I'm going to glue them into place. Hit them with a little kicker, and then mount the landing gear. And then we check for square, and we put some weights on it, and then we can get started on the wheels. So I drill these out so that they will fit onto the axles. And then we will move on to the wheel pants. So I drill out those braces, glue them down to the pants, and then put them onto the gear. And although I don't use the gear for landing, I usually hand catch or hand launch, I do like them for orientation. Okay, next up we're going to install these front braces, but this is where I also ran into the problem because I installed that upside down. There's a couple guide holes that I had to repoke on the bottom side. So we get those trimmed, dry fit, and then glued into place. Next up is going to be the differential horn, and I just get the servo horn placed into it, and then I'm going to put some thread with some CA glue around each of the edges, And then we will put our adjustable end links together. And I use this piece of wood. It's got a little hole in it here. You could also use a piece of styrofoam to push this through, and it just holds that little clip in place as you push it through. Then we're going to grab the servo horns and we're going to do the same process. I did this one upside down, so I had to go back and redo it. Next up is the Aileron pushrods. We get our heat shrink and our press-in links, put them together. Then I'm going to use a heat gun on these. Just be careful you don't melt the press-in link. While we're at it, don't get any CA onto the ears of the press-in link as well. I should have probably done the same process on the push rods while I had all that stuff ready to go, but I'll do that later. Now we're going to install our servo for our ailerons, and I did have to cut this open just a little bit, so I traced it with the pencil and then used this piece of metal as a cutting guide, and you want to make sure it stays snug in there. And now we're ready to install our differential horn. And I had a little clearance issue, so I trimmed off a couple little tabs on it. And remember, the horns face forward. Glue my elevator into place. Run my wire to the bottom. And then install our push rods. And when you tighten these down, don't go crazy. You can easily crush the carbon fiber. I trim those off a little and then put a little bit of CA on the ends. And then we can install the rudder servo. Moving on to the upper vertical fuselage, we're going to glue on our canopy. And I want to make sure that connection is really solid because that's where I do my hand catching from. We give it a dry fit, and you'll see that I needed to cut a little foam away from the servo for my ailerons. And this is exactly why we do a dry fit. You don't want to do that when you've got glue on everything and you're trying to press it together, so now's the best time. Once the dry fit's all done, we are ready to apply the glue. And then we press it into place. I'm really wiggling it back and forth to get the tabs seated all the way in. And keeping everything at 90 degrees, checking it with my square. Then we'll move on to the rudder. It's got a stiffener that goes in and a control horn on the left side. I prop up the end of the plane. That way when you set it down, it doesn't pull it back off. And then we're ready to thread through the vertical stiffeners, and they go all the way down through the plane. They're a little tricky to get into place. And up front there, it goes between each of the legs of the landing gear. And then I fill it with glue, and then we check for square one more time. Then we're going to do the push rods for the elevator and the rudder, and same process as the aileron push rods. And then we're going to put on all of these guides as well. And right here I noticed I was missing my elevator control horn, so I glued that into place, and then we can start onto our push rods. We'll start with the rudder first. And I just put a little glue on those and got them into place. Make sure they're all lined up and that none of them are binding. And as long as everything is aligned, that press and link should go right through the control horn there. And then we do the same process for the elevator. Then I'll go back and add in the final parts of the carbon fiber bracing for the vertical and horizontal stabilizers. Next up, we'll glue on the motor mount, and then we will start the installation of the electronics. For most of my models, I put all the electronics down on the left side of the fuselage, and then I run the power up to the upper right. That makes it easy to take on and off the battery. Then we'll start working on the upper and lower canalizers. These supports get glued into place, and then you cut down the middle of them. You can pull them apart a little, and then they clamp in there. Just make sure they're parallel to the wing. And then we will work on our trailing edge fences. Now on these side force generators, there are two different sizes here. The tabs have different lengths, so you can't really put them in the wrong spot. And now for the air brakes. I believe this part is left out of the manual entirely, but it is pretty straightforward to put together. When I put mine on, I did not glue them permanently. I just put them on so that I could take them off if I wanted to. I'm going to try it with and without and decide which I want to keep. You will see that there is a very faint outline on the bottom of the wing that shows where to place these. Now I'll get my prop and balance it. This will be the first time I'm using a carbon fiber prop on one of these. And you can get the prop balancer and O-ring installer from Twisted Hobbies. I'm going to do the final plug-in of all my electronics and set my center of gravity. On the maiden flight, my first question was, how does this compare to the Clik 21? Because I love my Clik 21, and I am just not good enough of a pilot to be able to tell the difference. They both fly amazingly well. So this is an F3P plane. It is meant for doing pattern precision flight, and I don't use it like that. I use it as a very slow, very floaty 3D flyer that can do things other planes can't do. The way it just hovers in knife edge is so cool, and it is such a joy to fly. There's a little pinwheel, and the way it rolls so slowly, it's like nothing else. It's like a feather, and it is like poetry in motion. There's so much about flying a Clik that is special. I was nervous to show my flight with this because I'm not that great of a pilot, and there's so many people who are amazing, have such precision and skill with this plane, and I just can't fly it like they do. But I wanted to show everybody how I fly it and how I enjoy it, because I kind of assume that most people are gonna fly it like me and can't fly it quite like the professionals can. I fly this at indoor meets, and I fly it outdoors when there's really, really low wind, because obviously it's so light that any wind is really gonna push it around a lot. My model came out to 125 grams without the battery, and the battery that I'm using is a 2S 380 milliamp. I think it's 18 grams. So it's really, really light, and that's the name of the game, is make it light, make it floaty, and it is a treat to be able to fly the Clik. Using the carbon fiber PT prop, I didn't notice any difference in performance over another prop, just that it's super lightweight. I had to do a fair amount of messing around with the CG and messing around with the trims on the surfaces, because everything that you do on this plane is really magnified because it is such a slow flyer. And so if you have something that's slightly off, you'll see how when it's flying in knife edge, it'll pull towards you, so you need to do some adjustments to keep that from happening. And it's a lot of testing and figuring it out until it flies really neutral. Nothing really beats a Clik when it comes to indoor flying. They look different than other planes. They look a little weird, but that's kind of the appeal of it, is that it's something different that performs like nothing else. I've tried mine both with and without the air brakes, and again, I'm not that good of a pilot to be able to tell the difference. I just like getting it out and playing with it and seeing how smooth I can try and make it look. If you want to humble yourself a little bit, try and look at the program for the F3P and try and fly the whole program. It is really difficult when it comes to all the arresty and being precise. It would be so fun to be involved in one of those competitions, but that is a few years off for me to be able to fly at that level and ability. So for now, I will practice my precision flying, but really I'm just in it to have fun. When the weather here is rainy and windy, it's awesome that we have clubs around here that host indoor meets. So this is a go-to plane for every indoor meet, and there's always going to be a group of people that have the Clik, whether it's the 21 or the 25. You can't go wrong. Hopefully you've enjoyed the build video, and I hope you enjoy flying your Clik 25.